So today we're diving into an upcoming pattern that's really, really interesting. It's got some similarities to what we've covered in recent videos, but I've noticed the models getting a little more aggressive with snowfall, especially for the Northeast, the Midwest, the Great Lakes, and even parts of the Mid-Atlantic. The GFS model in particular has been showing quite a bit. But before we get ahead of ourselves, I want everyone to just pump the brakes a little and take it with a grain of salt. This is a late season snowfall we're talking about, and things can change fast. But before we get into the details, hit the subscribe button, like this video, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for your support. And that's honestly one of my favorite things about the weather. So it's unpredictable, and we've seen time and time again that anything can happen. That's what makes it so fascinating. So today, we're going to break all of this down. And on top of that, there's no real break in severe weather either. I see at least 2 or 3 severe weather events coming up over the next couple of weeks. So while we're looking at snowfall and cold air moving in, we're not really sacrificing any of the severe weather. And this pattern is staying incredibly active. Let's start by taking a look at the 6 to 10 day temperature outlook from the National Weather Service. Now, this one is still pretty aggressive, though it has backed off a little from what we saw yesterday. But the general cold pattern between the 26th and the 30th is still very much present, particularly across the Midwest, the Great Lakes, the Northeast, and even parts of the Mid-Atlantic. Meanwhile, the West is dealing with a lot of warmth, which is what we call a positive PNA pattern. However, this one isn't your classic textbook positive PNA. It's a bit more spread out, extending into the South Central states. And what that's doing is essentially squeezing that cold air further into the Northeast. It's definitely not the cleanest, most traditional positive PNA look, but it's still very impactful. Now, shifting gears to the precipitation outlook for that same time frame, March 26th through the 30th, you'll notice a lot of activity in the northern part of the country. This is exactly the area we're watching for potential snowfall. I'd say the northern half of this region has the better chances, but we do have some model guidance hinting at snowfall even for areas further south, and we'll break that down a little bit. The South Central U.S. is also looking pretty active, with hints of severe weather popping up in the model runs today. Meanwhile, the Southwest stays relatively quiet, and the Southeast is a little quieter than usual, though still seeing some precipitation, just not as much as what we typically expect this time of year. Now let's zoom out a little further and check out the 8 to 14 day temperature outlook, which covers March 28th through April 3rd. We're seeing warmer conditions continuing to spread across the South Central U.S. and a good portion of the western states. The Southeast is also seeing a good bit of warmth, and that warmth is pushing eastward, which means that cooler air is getting a little more confined to the northern states by the end of March and early April. We don't have the official 3 to 4 week outlook from the National Weather Service just yet. That'll come out tomorrow, but it'll be interesting to see how this all develops beyond this point. When we look at precipitation trends over this period, it's a lot of the same story. We're still watching that northwestern region closely, but there's also quite a bit happening in the Midwest, Great Lakes, Ohio Valley, and even into parts of the Mid-Atlantic. Southeast, again, seems slightly less active, but it's not bone dry either. Meanwhile, the Southwest remains pretty quiet, just like we saw on the 6 to 10 day outlook. Now, let's take a step back and look at what's been happening over the past 20 days. We've been tracking the temperature anomalies all month, and now that it's March 20th, we have a full 20-day snapshot. What's been really evident is that the western U.S. has been locked into a cold pattern, which we call a negative PNA, basically the opposite of what we were just discussing. Meanwhile, the central and eastern states have been quite a bit warmer than normal. As we head into the final third of March, we're seeing a pretty dramatic shift. While 1/3 of the month might not be enough to completely erase the temperature pattern of the first 2/3, it'll definitely make things look less extreme overall. Now, looking ahead with the European model, we're seeing some interesting setups developing. For example, by Sunday, March 23rd, a pretty significant snowstorm is showing up for the upper Midwest and Great Lakes. This one is packing heavy snow for Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and even parts of Indiana and Ohio. On top of that, we've got the potential for severe thunderstorms further south, stretching from the lower Midwest into the deep South. And then by Monday, the 24th, that system moves out, but we still have some remnant thunderstorms lingering around the Gulf states and possibly even pushing up toward the southeast. Fast forward to the 25th and 26th, and things get even more interesting. We have another system developing with snowfall showing up in parts of West Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and even northwestern New Jersey, mostly in the higher elevation. By the 27th and beyond, we see yet another potential storm system forming, bringing more snowfall to the northern states and another possible severe weather outbreak in the south. Before we get into the details, hit the subscribe button, like this video, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for your support. Now, this is where we need to be cautious. Once we get beyond the 240-hour mark on these model runs, things get increasingly unreliable. It's fun to look at, but these details will almost certainly change. What's important is the overall pattern. The fact that we're seeing multiple storms tracking from the west into the plains and then moving eastward, that's the big takeaway here. The exact positioning and intensity of these systems will shift as we get closer, but the pattern itself is definitely something to watch. And speaking of things to watch, the GFTS model has been showing some pretty wild snowfall potential, especially as we get toward the end of March and even into early April. Again, take this with a grain of salt, but we're seeing some big snowfall signals for the Midwest, Great Lakes, and even parts of the mid-Atlantic and Northeast. One particular run even showed a substantial snowstorm for southern New England around April 1st, which, let's be real, is pretty ironic. April Fool's Day, a massive snowstorm. Most people wouldn't believe it, but again, while the details will change, the fact that models are showing the possibility of late season snowfall means it's something we at least have to keep an eye on. Yeah. Now, let's break down the severe weather potential over the next few days. Tomorrow, we've got just a small marginal risk of severe storms over Missouri and eastern Kansas. The main threats there are large hail and isolated damaging winds. But the real action kicks off on Sunday. That's when we have a much higher risk of severe storms stretching from southern Kentucky all the way down into eastern Texas. This system is going to bring large hail, scattered damaging winds, and yes, the potential for a few tornadoes. The area we'll be watching most closely for tornado activity includes Texarkana, central and western Mississippi, northern Louisiana, and southern Arkansas. That said, a few tornadoes could still develop outside of that core risk zone, so everyone in the affected areas should stay weather aware. As for today, rain and snow will continue in the Pacific Northwest, but as that energy moves over the Rockies and into the plains, it's going to strengthen, and by late Saturday into early Sunday, we'll see it develop into a much more powerful storm system. By Sunday morning, we might see some isolated severe storms in Missouri, mainly overnight, with damaging winds and hail possible, though it's a lower end risk. Meanwhile, heavy snowfall will be ongoing across the upper Midwest, from northern Wisconsin into North Dakota. See how by lunchtime, that snow will push further east, and we'll see some showers and isolated thunderstorms in the Ohio Valley. Nothing too severe there yet, but by the evening, that's when we'll start to see storms fire up. Keep in mind, Sunday's severe weather threat is mainly a late afternoon and evening event. It'll even continue into the overnight hours. By around 9 p.m., storms will be ongoing from Kentucky down through northern Mississippi, and new storms will likely fire further west, even into Texas. But this isn't going to be a classic outbreak setup. Instead, we're expecting what's called a mesoscale convective system, a long line of thunderstorms. Within this line, we could see large hail, damaging winds, and even a few embedded tornadoes. By Monday morning, snow will still be falling in the upper Midwest and Northeast, but the severe storm threat will start to die down. There could be a few lingering severe storms near the Gulf Coast, but overall, the risk will be much lower. Snow will continue through New England and parts of Canada through Monday afternoon, but by Tuesday, it should clear out. On the storm system, cold air is going to rush into the Northeast, especially on Sunday and Monday. Then, as we head into Tuesday and Wednesday, we'll see a sharp contrast in temperatures, above average, warmth spreading through the Great Plains and West Coast, while the Ohio Valley and Northeast stay colder than normal. By late next week, the pattern becomes a bit more uncertain, but it looks like we'll continue seeing these shots of cold air moving in from Canada. Even though we're not expecting any major storm systems next week, these weaker systems will still bring periodic bursts of cold air, keeping winter alive in parts of the Northeast. Looking even further ahead as we move into early April, we're likely going to see more big storms developing. Once that ridge over the West Coast starts to break down, that's when we could see a more active weather pattern return. In the meantime, though, one bit of good news. By the end of March, above average rainfall is expected across parts of Texas, which is desperately needed right now due to ongoing drought and recent wildfires. More rain is also expected across the northern U.S., which should help with any lingering dry conditions. As for temperatures, warmer than normal conditions will continue across the Great Plains and West Coast through the end of March, while the Northeast and Midwest stay colder than average. That means winter isn't quite done for some of you just yet. But for most of the country, we're pretty much in full spring mode now. All right, that's all for today's forecast. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future updates. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.